our presentation on manufacturing with our interview tips in 30 minutes. Today we have our guest speaker, Jim McGow from Valuable Resources Company. Valuable Resources Company deals primarily with manufacturing as a human resources consultant. Um, and Jim is one of the HR consultants with that company. So today I'd like to welcome Jim to our presentation.
Hello, thank you.
So let's get started with our presentation today. And first and foremost, what should an applicant do to prepare themselves for the interview?
Well, first of all, they should always have done some preliminary research, either on the company and on the interviewer when possible. When you know who the interviewer is going to be, you want to have done a little bit of background on them so you can talk to them pretty easily when you have chances to, whether and applying that information then either to the questions you have for them or into your answers or to any small talk that occurs before or after the interview itself. Um, so, for example, you could say to them, I understand the importance of your company places on scrap limits, but what is the largest process improvement initiative you have in place? So it shows that you did some research and background on the company and what their initiatives are, and you're asking the follow-up question to that.
Great, that's wonderful. So let's when uh, when you're working on this, do interviewers want to have a conversation with you, or what do they want to do?
They're more interested in having a conversation, not a Q&A session. So you want to plan your angle ahead of time um, to have talking points, not just answers and possible questions you're going to be asked. It should flow like a conversation.
Great. So let's pull a poll question in here for the audience to answer. So before an interview, please answer. Pick as many of them as you want to. So are they getting the good answers here, Jim?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Now, most of them, the lowest one was the prepare questions to ask, and I would stress that that's really important because if you come into an interview and then the guy says at the end, do you have any questions, and you don't have any, that's critical. It shows you didn't plan ahead, you didn't think of it, you didn't care to take the time. I think that's very important. But it's also important to make sure you ask the right questions too. You don't want to ask, what's your compensation policy? You don't want to ask, um, how do you guys pay? What's the basis like that? You don't want to ask those questions. What's vacation like? You want to ask questions that pertain more to the industry and what they do as a company too, just as a side note.
That's great. That's a great answer there, Jim. I'm going to move that poll out of the way so we can move forward with our presentation.
Also,
So,
I noticed there also was a comment on there about dressing, and I would stress that you should dress as if you were going to go meet corporate for the day,
okay,
comfortably but professionally.
good, good. So let's talk about how somebody can be prepared so that during the interview they've got the right things. So should somebody bring a copy of their credentials with them if they've got credentials?
Yeah, they should. There are three common kind of credentials that are most commonly used. One is the MSSC, which is the Manufacturing Skills Standards Council, which is nationally recognized and should be brought. There's also the NCRC, which is the National Career Readiness Certificate, and there's also an NIMS, which is the National Institute for Metalworking Skills. Any of those three are highly sought after credentials and should be brought. And if you have other ones, if they are relevant to the company and the position you're applying to, they should be brought. And if you're unsure whether it's relevant, bring it just to be safe.
Good. Now we
Um,
got another bullet point on the screen here that says be prepared for the questions. So do you want to
right,
talk about that a moment?
sure. at the start of the interview, you if they say, hey, do you need anything, or if they offer you a glass of water, always either ask for a glass of water or accept it. Reason being is that if you hit a hard question or something you weren't anticipating or something that just totally caught you off guard, it will give you a second and eliminate any awkward pause if you get stuck. You can take a sip of water, collect your thoughts, and then proceed, and it won't be like, you're trying to come up with an answer for it.
Right.
But you
Good
want to be
point.
very careful from the start to the end about your mannerisms. You don't want to do a lot of hand talking, and you don't want to stay away from any slang, meaning audible pauses like any swear slips that you may have commonly, any asides, comments about something you're saying, and you want to watch those likes, those goes, that says, those kind of things. You want to try to keep it professional, keep it very standard as well.
And the new one is so, right?
Right.
Have you heard that
Yeah,
one before?
I have.
So what about when you're talking about your former employment?
Former employment, you want to be sure that you explain to them about former employment is what I did, what you specifically did, not what your team did, not what your company did, not what your, anything else. It's always what you did. Because they want to know what you brought to the table, what you completed, and what you thought, not what anyone else in your company or your team did, or department. You
Great.
also want to be, if you have knowledge of industry-specific lingo, that is a plus. You want to use that, but you don't want to overdo it.
Oh, of course, because in some cases the person doing the interviewing isn't actually in the industry. They may be a recruiter that doesn't really know everything that the person that's going to be working with you does know, right?
Right, because there are always buzzwords which are popular words in that industry, and they may have been indicated, hey, if they use these words, that's a good sign. So that's why it'd be good to use a few of them, but if you use a lot of them over and over again, you may lose the recruiter and he won't be able to give you a accurate overall assessment.
Great, great. Are there any basic manufacturing questions that somebody may hear?
Uh, sure. Let me go back a step and say talking about yourself. Um,
Okay.
Lots of interviews that start with a question, so tell me about yourself. Now, in my experience, most of the time, that's because the interviewer is just trying to buy some time to read through your resume to prepare what they're going to ask and what you have and what your resume says. Not always, but a lot of times that's the case. So people are going to start talking about their high school, their college, their work experience, and stuff like that, and it's really not very relevant to the interview and what the interviewer is trying to get. So you want to bring out something, like have an answer ready that's going to force them to look up from your resume because of what you said. So it makes them say, well, wait, what? Or why do you say that? Or what do you mean? Explain that further. But it's got to be relevant to the industry. So it's not about the lemonade stand you had in high school. It's got to be something that's relevant to the industry itself. A good example would be someone says, tell me about yourself. And you say, I save companies money, and that's it. Immediately, they're going to, first of all, it's short, and second of all, they're going to go, okay, how do you do that? You say, well, I implement cost-saving initiatives in the processes by, whatever it is that you're going to do. You want to do it that way so the interview starts and you can kind of control the flow. And it doesn't give them time to get through the resume.
Great.
They're also going to
That's a great
remember,
tip.
that it was shortened to the point. That, well, tell me about yourself. Well, this is what I do. And then you can go back at the end and say, this is why you should hire me. Same reasoning.
Good point. So do
Now, as
any
far as your question goes
manufacturing
to,
interview?
sorry?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
As far as the other questions to prepare for that may come up in a manufacturing role, some of the things to at least think about so that you have an answer ready for, what was your biggest accomplishment? Most people say, oh, I know that. Well, do you really? I mean, what is your biggest accomplishment in your mind? Also, you want to think about What are you most proud about? Um, you want to know what are your strengths and weaknesses. You want to know what your strengths are, and you definitely want to know what your weaknesses are, because if you know your weaknesses, you can talk about how you are um, changing things to make them better and how you plan to improve on those weaknesses, rather than just saying,
Oh,
"Oh, I have weaknesses and they're just weak." Well, they're weak, but here's what I'm doing about it. Um,
great.
and now some of the very specific questions about manufacturing initially is, tell me what you know about cost analysis. Tell me what you know about process improvements. Tell me what you know about scrap usage. And if you're not asked those kinds of questions, work them and research them, do your background work on that so that you can then either work them into other answers or into your questions.
Great. Great tips. So do, do math questions or reading, does any of that kind of stuff kind of come up in the interview process or not?
Uh, Math, not as much. Um, I haven't really heard or asked many math questions. Um, Reading, I mean, unless there's the occasional instance where someone may send you something to read or give you something to read and see what you drew out of it. But
Okay.
that's about the extent that I've seen.
All right. And are there normally different questions for an entry-level person versus a more experienced person?
It depends on the position that they're interviewing for. Um, yes, they're different. Someone that's entry level and new to the industry may not have much prior experience to talk about what they did at a prior company, as in, process improvements or scrap or cost analysis or any of those key terms. So the answers may be a little bit different, kind of saying, what do you know about the industry? What do you know about a manufacturing environment? What do you know about my company? And something like that, just to see that you've done your homework.
Good. What what are some good questions for people to ask?
Well, um, kind of
Would
what
they
I,
ask about training or technology, or would they be working on a team? What kind of things might be good questions for me to ask the interviewer?
you want to ask about training. What kind of training is involved? Is there cross-training for other positions? Something like that. What's the technology or the programs that you're using for those things? A lot of metal fabricating companies have a laser cutter, and that requires a certain amount of technological know-how. And so are you using up-to-date, cutting-edge materials, or are you, where are you kind of at in that stage? Talking about teamwork, what's the team culture? What's the uh, association like? Do you guys work together on everything? Is it very structured? Is there a chain of command? How does that stuff work? You may want to ask about processes and procedures, and then products to market. This will show not only that you have knowledge in the industry, shows you have interest in the industry, and any of the answers that they may give, you want to listen very carefully to, because it may open you up and pose you to more questions.
That's a good point, a very good point, because it also shows your listening skills too. Let's take a time out here for a poll question. So during an interview, and if the audience wants to answer as many as they can, are you seeing some good answers here, Jim?
Yeah?
What's one way for somebody to not be nervous so that they aren't fidgeting?
Well, one, like I said earlier, was being dressed comfortably. You don't want to be in a stiff suit or something like that if it's not comfortable for you. Two, the glass of water, like I said, does help. It does calm your nerves a little bit. You can stop for a second, take a sip, compose yourself, that kind of thing. Um, three is, I don't know, have someone you know interview you, kind of mock before you go.
Oh, yeah, good
And
idea.
that may get some of the jitters out.
Good idea. And then they can
And
also tell
don't
you,
look at the person that's interviewing you as, you know, your enemy. He's just curious about you, and you're trying to therefore impress him or her or them. When you're giving your answers to people, most interviewers know when you're telling us what we want to hear. So you don't want to script it. That's where the conversation part comes in. You don't want to lie because that inevitably will come out through your work or through some other avenue, and that'll get you in a lot of trouble you don't want to be in. If you want to impress her, him, or them so that you're remembered when the decision time comes, you want to make sure that some of your answers are really well thought out. So, for example, hey, you remember Lisa? When we asked her, what's your approach to work? She said, I work hard till the job is done and done right. When it's done, and I know when it's done right because there's nothing else that I can do to improve upon it.
oh,
That's going to be something someone's going to remember. So when they're down to making decision time, and there's four people left, they're going to, oh, you remember Lisa's answer about that? Yeah, that was really good. And it may
right.
put you on top if the people they're going to call first. You want to focus your answers on how what you have done will complement that position, and make sure that your passion and your interest in the industry is obvious. And that's why you do that by asking good and elaborate questions and answers.
Good.
And like I said before, your answers should always be about what you did, because manufacturers care about primarily three things: maximizing efficiency, quality control, and cost savings. So some of the real good things to bring up if you have prior experience in the industry is to say, I saved my company X number of dollars by doing this, or I brought in this many dollars by doing this, or I reduced usage and error to save my money, save my company this kind of money by doing this. Those are all big things because it all focuses back to efficiency, quality, and savings.
Great. Let's move on to what I call an instant interview. And I see a lot of these kind of things at a job fair or a hiring event. And a lot of times a person that's attending one of those things can actually do the research about the companies that are holding the event. But what are the best things, in your opinion, that a job seeker can do in this situation?
Well, you see some of my points up there on the screen. But I think it's very important to know what it is you're looking to do, because they're going to say first and foremost, hi, what's your name? Shake your hand, and then they're going to say, so what is it you're looking to do, or what is it that you are doing currently? And you really don't want to have to pause or think about that. You really want to say exactly what you're doing right now, what you want to do. So that's something you should rehearse and be sure that you know exactly how you want to say it. Um, they're going to ask you, so what about our company interests you? Well, that again, you should know ahead of time what position you are seeking in that company and why that company is going to help you get there. What it is you want to accomplish by working at that company and what that company is going to give you to aid in that process. And then the good questions I talked about before, were those are some of the key headers that are important to ask about, because you don't want to ask those questions, like I said before, about compensation, vacation days, and some of that incidental stuff.
Great. Let's pull out this last question and see what the audience knows before we have you talk about it. So after the interview, I looks
Okay?
like we've got some people giving some good answers here. What do you think, Jim?
Now, in my opinion, I think sending an email immediately after the interview is a good thing. And then following up a week later by sending a personal note written letter. Because you don't know at the end of the interview whether you have impressed them or not, but you can be remembered by writing a thank you card in an email.
Good.
And it will show
Good.
that you have professional etiquette, which can go a long way with a lot of the employers out there.
That's very good.
So that's what I would do. I would do those two things,
All right. So what
especially if they say, especially when you ask them, hey, what's going to be the timeline? At the end of the interview, you can ask, hey, what's going to be the timeline on you making a decision? If they say, oh, we're going to start sending out, letters in 2 weeks, or send out offers in 2 weeks, then maybe a week and a half to shoot out another message would be a good time. So they get it just
Good
before
point.
they make their decisions.
Good point. So what should an interviewee do near the end of an interview?
You definitely want to recap some of the things that you went over that were key points. Just touch on them again. You also want to kind of, the one question they may ask, which is also good to rehearse, I didn't mention this earlier, was, so why should I hire you for this position? And
Good.
that's really a hard question to answer. But if you go back to what you said initially as to what you do, and then use that and the other things you brought up during the interview to kind of swing it all together, and then make sure you say, I will bring to your company, you say whatever the company is, if it's, XYZ, I will bring, passion and cost-saving initiatives to XYZ. Use the company's name, use their name, use your name to make it very personal. Don't just kind of do an overarching response.
Mhm. Good point.
And then also, pose them, throw the question back in their, on their table and say, what is it that you're looking for from a candidate? And then that can be helpful for you then to also then come back with the answer that they're looking for a little bit,
Good
a
question.
little bit curtailed. So, before you know the interview's at an end, say, so what is it you're looking for in a candidate to fill this position? Who's the right person? Who's the right kind of person for this position? And that will help give you an idea of what to bring up and what to focus on.
Great point. And then after the interview, we touched on it a little bit in the poll question, but what should somebody do, kind of like in a process? What should they do after the interview?
I don't understand. Don't follow you.
In an order, should they send the email immediately, and then what should they do the next step, and what should they do after that? So you kind of touched on a little bit earlier,
Well,
which
one, yes, definitely send
email
an
right away.
email immediately. As soon as you get home, send an email thanking them for taking the time to interview you and how you're interested in the position and are looking forward to hearing from them. And then you want to make some notes from the interview so you can remember what it was you guys talked about in case there's a second phone interview, or whether you need to talk to somebody else in the company, or whether they bring you in for another personal interview. You want to be able to review the notes that were in the first interview so that you don't you don't change your answers or change what you said in the first interview. So you want to have a record of what it was that you went over and what you said and what you talked about. Especially if they post any questions to you, make sure you write those down so that, in case they ask you those questions again, you're ready for it. So that's a good way to prepare yourself. It's also something good to look at when you go to another interview with another company, is you want to have that information too, because you're going to see questions that are recreated and re-asked across the board in manufacturing. So it's good to kind of get the feel for that way. And then, like I said, after that, after you get to the point where the timeline you asked about is coming to an end, go ahead and shoot that personal email or a personal written letter over.
Great. We have a question from the audience. It says, what about taking notes during the interview? Is that a thing that is recommended to do?
It depends. I would say, do you mind if I take notes before you do that?
All right.
So, I mean, by all means, I think if it helps you remember things, that's that's crucial to do that. But I always ask, do you mind if I take notes? Because I think eye contact is important too in the interview.
Mhm.
But one thing I wanted to mention is when you do eye contact, let's not be, don't dagger eyes the person across the table from you. You want to look at them and then kind of, I don't know, take a moment here and look off to the side or look down or look at your glass of water. Gives you another, non-awkward way to look at something else. You don't want to just be like staring at their pupils because that can make the person across the table feel very uncomfortable.
That's
Make the
very
interview
true.
not comfortable for them either.
Right. We have a couple people typing. Why don't we give everybody just a moment? Okay, we have another question here from Andrea that says, what about bringing a list of questions in to ask during the interview?
I don't see any huge glaring issue with that. I mean, if that's what's going to help you remember them and make sure you have questions, then do that. But if you can memorize them, that's probably better. And also, if you bring a list in of questions, you may be too focused on asking the right questions and not listening to what they said because they may have answered it previously. So, have a couple questions in mind, and then if you want to bring a list of additional questions, that's fine. If he says anything else, then you can pull those out. But have a few memorized that you can ask. That way you can take time and listen to what they're saying, because they may answer your question in the course of their answer.
That's a good point. Sherry's asking, do you think sometimes that an employer will test you whether you will take notes or not? I've been on interviews where a piece of paper and pencil were laid out on the desk. Should you take notes when this is done or not? I have always found this to be a bit awkward.
I think maybe some employers and some interviewers may feel that if you're not taking notes, you're not paying attention. Um, I've never done this, nor have I ever had done to me when I was interviewing a lot. Um, but if that's the case, I would suggest take the paper, take the pencil, and jot down a few notes when they're talking about the position or about their company or about themselves. Make a few notes. It's not going to hurt you or help you, or it's not going to hurt you in any way. It may even help you when you're making your notes afterwards about the interview.
Good point.
But I don't think that they're testing you, but they may feel that if you take notes, that may be a positive thing for them, for you.
Right. All right. Well, I don't see anybody else typing, and we are approaching our 30 minutes, which is what we promised today. And I'd love to thank Jim McGow from Valuable Resources Company for sharing his knowledge with us on these interview tips for the manufacturing career path. So thanks so much, Jim, for helping us out today. And if you'd like to say thank you to the audience.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Have a great day, everybody.